In the soaring steel cathedral of Vance Innovations, tattoos were a confession of indiscipline. The unspoken creed was etched into the polished marble floors and reflected in the cold, panoramic glass. Conformity was currency, and perfection was the only acceptable standard. To be different was to be flawed. To be flawed was to be disposable. This was the gospel according to the old guard, a doctrine of aesthetic purity that had calcified into the company's very soul. This silent verdict hung in the air the moment the young woman, waiting for her turn to be judged, rolled up her sleeve. A phoenix, rendered in hues of fire and twilight, took flight across her skin. A ripple of snickers passed through the other candidates, followed by mocking whispers that slithered through the quiet tension of the waiting area. "Clueless," one murmured into his phone, his smirk a flash of polished teeth. Flaunting a tattoo at an interview for Vance. They dismissed her as a misplaced joke, a piece of grit in a meticulously polished machine, a ghost already being ushered out the door before she had even truly arrived. But minutes later, when the grand doors to the boardroom swung open, a profound silence fell, freezing every sneer and stifling every whisper. The very same woman re-entered the space. This time, she was not a candidate to be scrutinized, but a presence to be revered. An assistant, her voice trembling with awe, announced her arrival, introducing our founder and CEO, Miss Ilara Vance. The morning had begun like any other, in the gleaming heart of the financial district. Vance Innovations stood as a monument to ambition, a shard of glass and steel piercing the sky, reflecting a distorted, elongated version of the world below. Inside, the lobby was a river of controlled chaos, smelling of ionized air, expensive perfume, and the faint, metallic scent of anxiety. Men in tailored suits, their faces set with grim purpose, moved with a predatory grace born of Ivy League schools and inherited confidence. Women in heels that clicked like relentless metronomes navigated the polished floors, their expressions a careful blend of ambition and deference. The air itself hummed with the low thrum of immense wealth and relentless pressure. Into this world stepped Ilara Vance, an anomaly in every sense, a deliberate disruption of the carefully curated aesthetic. Her simple white button-up shirt was crisp and clean but unremarkable. Her black slacks could have been purchased from any department store rack. Slung over her shoulder was a canvas bag, its straps frayed from years of use, the kind of accessory a college student might carry books in, not a contender for a position at a corporate titan. She paused for a moment near the cascading water feature, an island of stillness in the rushing current, her gaze sweeping over the lobby. She wasn't merely looking, she was observing, collecting data. She saw the forced, tight smiles exchanged between colleagues, the way a junior analyst flinched when his superior walked past, the subtle but constant preening of reflections in the mirrored columns. This was the ecosystem she had created, but an ecosystem that had evolved in her absence from the daily fray, shaped by the stewards she had left in charge. No one noticed her. No one ever did, not at first. Her face held a soft, almost delicate quality, but there was an unyielding strength in the set of her jaw, a quiet defiance in the way she held her shoulders. She was invisible, and for now, that was her greatest advantage. Upstairs, on the 48th floor, the atmosphere was even more rarefied, the air thinner, the silence heavier. The interview room was a glass-walled enclosure, an architectural choice meant to signify transparency, but which, in practice, served as a stage for judgment. It put the candidates on display like specimens in a museum. Outside, in a waiting area furnished with minimalist Italian leather chairs, a handful of them sat, clutching portfolios like shields. They were the cream of the crop, young, polished, their ambition a palpable hunger in the air. A man named Liam, his dark hair gelled into a rigid helmet, checked his Rolex for the third time in 5 minutes. He sized up the woman sitting across from him, Beatrice, who wore a pearl necklace that seemed to chide the room for its lack of tradition. They exchanged a look of mutual, unspoken superiority. They were the right sort of people. They belonged here. Inside the glass box, at the head of a long obsidian table that reflected a distorted, dark version of the ceiling, sat Sterling Prescott. At 55, he was the acting chairman of the board, a man who had built his career on 2 pillars, unshakable rules and an immaculate reputation. To Sterling, order was everything. A wrinkle in a suit, a scuff on a shoe, a tattoo on the skin, these were not minor imperfections. They were symptoms of a deeper chaos, a moral failing, a a crack in the foundation of a disciplined mind. He saw himself not as a manager, but as a guardian of standards, a bulwark against the creeping tide of mediocrity and casualness that he believed was ruining the world. Next to him was Corinne Fletcher, the head of HR. In her early 30s, she was a product of fierce, clawing ambition. Having come from a background far less privileged than Sterling's, she now overcompensated with a zealous enforcement of the company's unwritten rules. She wore a fake, bright smile that never reached her eyes. Her red lipstick was a slash of aggression, her blazer a size too tight, as if she were trying to physically contain her desperate need to prove she belonged. She saw Ilara's canvas bag touch the floor, and her smile faltered. It was an affront, a sign of someone who didn't understand the language of power, and therefore was powerless. "Ilara Vance," Corinne said, glancing at the plain, single-page resume before her. The name meant nothing to her. The document was sparse, listing skills and experiences without the usual embellishments. The interview began with a perfunctory series of questions, her tone bored and dismissive. "Why Vance Innovations?" Ilara answered calmly, her voice even and clear. "Because it was built on the principle of solving problems, not creating them. I'm interested in efficiency, integrity, and forward momentum." The answers were insightful, cutting to the core of the company's founding ethos, but Corinne was barely listening. She was looking at the simple fabric of Ilara's shirt, the lack of makeup, the absence of any designer labels. Sterling remained silent, his gold-tipped fountain pen, a relentless metronome, tapping, tapping, tapping against a leather notebook, marking his impatience. He had already made up his mind. This candidate was a waste of his valuable time. Then it happened. The moment that would alter the course of the day and the company forever. Ilara, feeling the cuff of her shirt a little tight against her wrist, reached over with her other hand to adjust the simple, unadorned watch she wore. The movement was fluid, unconscious, a small, human gesture in a sterile, inhuman room. As she rolled the sleeve up just an inch, the crisp white fabric slid back, and the phoenix was revealed. It wasn't a small, discreet piece of ink. It was a masterpiece of art and intention. It caught the recessed lighting from the ceiling, its wings of crimson, gold, and deep indigo stretching across her forearm, a vibrant, living thing against her pale skin. Each feather seemed to hold a flicker of flame, its eye a spark of intelligent defiance. The tapping of Sterling's pen stopped. The abrupt silence was deafening. Corinne's smile vanished completely, replaced by a mask of sheer disbelief that quickly hardened into contempt. Her mind raced. How dare she? To bring such vulgarity into this room, into his presence. It was an act of profound disrespect. Outside, the candidates, who had been feigning disinterest, now leaned forward, their eyes locked on the scene unfolding in the glass cage. Liam's lips curled into a sneer. Beatrice raised a perfectly manicured hand to her mouth to hide a gasp of theatrical shock. The silent judgment of the building, of its culture, had found its focal point, and it was about to speak. "We value professionalism here, miss." "Vance," Corinne began, her voice sharp, laced with the condescending tone one might use on a misbehaving child. She deliberately paused before the name, a small, cruel power play to emphasize Ilara's insignificance. "Not rebellious types like you." The words landed like a slap in the silent room, the accusation of being a type designed to strip Ilara of her individuality. Outside the glass, the muffled snickers were clear enough. Liam, the man with the helmet of gelled hair, leaned over to the candidate next to him. "Imagine showing off tattoos at a Vance interview. That's not just clueless, it's career suicide." "Utterly classless," Beatrice, the woman with the pearl necklace, muttered, her lips curling in disgust as she pointedly looked away, as if the mere sight of the tattoo might somehow tarnish her. Sterling Prescott leaned forward, placing his pen down with a deliberate finality that signaled the end of any real consideration. His voice was low, a gravelly rumble that was more verdict than opinion. "This company, Miss Vance, does not tolerate individuals who choose to defile their own bodies. It shows a fundamental lack of discipline, a disregard for long-term consequences." His internal monologue was even harsher. "It's a mark of the gutter, a sign of impulsivity. People like this cannot be trusted with responsibility. They are weak-willed, ruled by fleeting whims rather than strategic thought." He stared at Ilara, his eyes cold and unwavering, as if he could will her to shrink under the weight of his moral authority. Ilara didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She didn't stammer an apology or rush to explain. Instead, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips as she held his gaze a moment longer than he was comfortable with. It wasn't a smile of amusement, but of confirmation. She slowly rolled her sleeve back down, covering the ink, but its presence lingered in the room like a secret they were not prepared for. Her silence seemed to infuriate them more than any argument could. It was a refusal to participate in her own debasement. From the waiting area, another candidate, a woman in a severe navy blazer who had been watching intently, seized the opportunity to score points. "What's she even doing here?" she said, her voice intentionally loud enough to carry through the glass. "This isn't some back-alley tattoo parlor." Laughter, emboldened, rippled through the other candidates. They turned their heads in unison, a small pack of wolves watching for a sign of weakness, eager for the drama of her humiliation. Alara gave them none. Instead, she reached down, adjusted the strap of her canvas bag on the floor beside her, and stood a little straighter. The woman in the blazer, irritated by Alara's unnerving composure, continued her assault. "Look at her, acting like she's above it all. I bet she doesn't even have a degree. Probably forged her resume." The room buzzed with agreement, the candidates feeding off each other's disdain, united in their superiority. It was a classic case of in-group bonding by excluding an outsider. Sterling glanced at the woman and gave a slight, affirming nod, a silent reward for her sycophantic display. His judgment was now supported by a chorus. Corinne leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms over her chest, a posture of confrontational authority. "Do you honestly believe you could represent a global brand with that on your arm?" she asked, her tone dripping with scorn. The question was a rhetorical blade, meant not to be answered, but to cut. "This is how you protect the brand," she thought, a thrill of self-importance running through her. "You weed out the imperfections." The laughter from outside grew louder. "Big words coming from her," Liam whispered, nudging his friend. "She's definitely failing. Good. One less to compete with." Sterling's frown deepened. The interview had become a spectacle, but a useful one. It was a lesson for the others watching. "We require obedience, miss." "Vance," he said, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial level. "We require conformity. That is how excellence is maintained. We do not need someone who thinks they are different." For the first time since the tattoo was revealed, Alara spoke. Her voice was soft, yet it carried a strange resonance that silenced the room for a split second. "Perhaps my value lies in what's inside, not what's on my skin." The momentary quiet was broken by a snort from Corinne. This attempt at philosophical defiance was, to her, the final confirmation of the candidate's naivete. "This interview is over," she declared, her authority absolute. "You may leave." As Alara bent to pick up her bag, Liam, the man in the pinstripe suit, saw one last chance to impress the judges who were watching. "Hey," he called out smugly from the waiting area, "maybe try a coffee shop next time. They don't care about tattoos there." A fresh wave of laughter erupted, some even clapping as if he had delivered the cleverest of jokes. Alara paused, her hand on the strap of her bag. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes. Her own gaze was not angry, but analytical, like a scientist observing a specimen. "Maybe you should try listening," she said, her voice so quiet it barely carried, but it did. The man's smirk faltered, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. The laughter died. A strange tension now filled the room. Corinne stood, gesturing impatiently toward the door, eager to restore order. "Security will show you out," she said, her tone final. A broad-shouldered guard in a black uniform was already waiting, a silent, heavy presence. He gestured toward the elevators, his face a blank mask. As Alara walked past the row of candidates, their faces were a mixture of amusement and contempt. She met none of their gazes. Her own expression was unreadable, no tears, no anger, just that same unnerving calm. But her fingers tightened on the strap of her canvas bag, the knuckles white for a brief second. It was the only sign she had heard every single word and filed it away. The elevator doors closed behind Alara with a soft, definitive hiss, sealing her away from the sanctum of the 48th floor. The moment she was gone, the tension in the waiting area broke, and the candidates burst into animated chatter, a release of nervous energy now channeled into derision. Did she really think she'd get hired looking like that? Beatrice, the woman with the pearl necklace, said, shaking her head in disbelief as she reapplied her lipstick. Some people have no self-awareness. Probably some art school dropout who got lost, Liam added, basking in the glow of his earlier witty remark. She'll be serving me my latte tomorrow morning. He earned a round of sycophantic chuckles. Inside the boardroom, Corinne Fletcher smoothed down her blazer, a triumphant smile finally reaching her eyes. She felt a surge of satisfaction. She had identified a threat to the company's pristine image and had efficiently, ruthlessly eliminated it. Good thing we got rid of her quickly, she said to Sterling, her voice bright. She could have been a liability. Imagine her meeting with our clients in Japan. Sterling nodded, his lips pressed into a thin line of satisfaction. Precisely. We must maintain standards. It is the foundation of everything. He picked up his pen again, ready to move on to the next, more suitable candidate. But before he could resume his tapping, a frantic energy disturbed the room's carefully controlled composure. A young assistant, a woman named Chloe, whom Sterling barely knew existed, rushed in. Her face was flushed, her usually neat bun was coming undone, and a tablet was clutched in her trembling hand. "Sir," she whispered urgently to Sterling, her voice shaking with a mixture of fear and awe. "There's a problem." Sterling's eyes narrowed with irritation. He detested unscheduled interruptions and emotional displays. "What is it, Chloe? Speak up." "The CEO's team just sent a message," she stammered, trying to keep her voice low. "They're already in the building." Sterling's annoyance turned to confusion. "What do you mean, already? They weren't scheduled for another hour. We were supposed to have these interviews concluded." The assistant glanced nervously at the glass wall, where the candidates were now looking on with curiosity. She leaned closer. "They're coming up now, sir." And they saw the whole thing, from the lobby to right now. On the security feed, the color drained from Corinne's face. It was as if a plug had been pulled, emptying her of all her manufactured confidence. The clipboard she was holding slipped from her nerveless fingers and clattered onto the polished floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the suddenly tense room. The candidates outside didn't hear the exchange, but they sensed the abrupt shift in the atmosphere. The confident smirks vanished. Their chatter faded into an uneasy silence. Something was wrong. Sterling's mind, usually so orderly, was now a maelstrom of confusion and rising panic. The CEO? Alara Vance was notoriously private, a genius inventor who had long ago stepped back from the day-to-day operations to head up the innovation wing, leaving the corporate side to the board. He had never even met her in person. Why was she here? And why was she watching the security feeds? He forced a smile, his facial muscles feeling stiff and foreign. His voice was tight and unnaturally loud as he tried to project an aura of control. "Well, let's make sure everything is perfect for the CEO's arrival," he announced, loud enough for the candidates to hear. But his hands were shaking as he fumbled to straighten his already perfect tie. Just then, the grand double doors at the end of the hall, reserved for executive use, swung open with a silent, hydraulic grace. A different assistant, a man with an earpiece and an air of absolute calm, stepped forward. His voice was poised, professional, and carried across the entire floor with an authority that commanded instant obedience. "Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. Introducing the founder and chief executive officer of Vance Innovations, Miss Alara Vance." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Time itself slowed down. Sterling's gold-tipped pen slipped from his hand, landing on the obsidian table with a sharp clatter that sounded like a gunshot in the frozen silence. Corinne's mouth fell open, a small, soundless O of horror. The candidates stared, their jaws slack, their minds struggling to reconcile the name with the woman they had just seen escorted out in disgrace. Alara walked calmly back down the hallway toward them. She stepped back into the boardroom. She was wearing the same simple clothes, carrying the same frayed canvas bag. Nothing about her had changed, yet everything was different. The lighting in the room seemed to recenter around her. The air grew thick and heavy, charged with a power that had been there all along, merely hidden. She walked to the center of the room and paused, letting the crushing weight of their realization settle upon them. Then, with deliberate slowness, she lifted her hand and rolled up her sleeve, not just an inch this time, but all the way to her elbow. The phoenix blazed under the bright lights, its colors more vibrant than before. It was no longer a blemish to be hidden, but a banner being unfurled, a sigil of the very power they had so arrogantly dismissed. The room was so silent you could hear the frantic, terrified thumping of Corinne Fletcher's heart. Alara's lips curved into a small, knowing smile that held no warmth, only an unbreakable certainty. "I didn't come here to apply for a job," she said, her quiet voice cutting through the silence like diamond on glass, shattering their world. "I came to see who was worthy of representing my company." The fallout was immediate and absolute. The silence that followed Alara's declaration was not empty. It was filled with the deafening sound of careers imploding. Sterling Prescott's face, usually a healthy, authoritative pink, was now a mask of waxy white. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, his well-ordered mind utterly incapable of processing this catastrophic reality. I didn't know," he finally stammered, the words feeble and pathetic. He gripped the edge of the obsidian table as if to keep from collapsing. It was a misunderstanding, a terrible misunderstanding. Alara's eyes, calm and analytical, locked onto his. She raised a hand, a simple, elegant gesture that carried more power than his shout ever could, and it silenced him instantly. "No, Sterling," she said, her voice steady and devoid of malice, which made it all the more devastating. "That was not a misunderstanding. That was your character, on full display, unfiltered. You showed me exactly who you are when you believe you are speaking to someone with no power. And for that, I thank you. It has made my decision very simple." Corinne Fletcher, her face flushed a blotchy, tear-streaked red, stumbled forward. Her carefully constructed persona of the ruthless HR executive had crumbled, revealing the terrified, insecure woman beneath. "We only wanted to preserve the company's image, Miss Vance," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "We were acting in what we believed were the company's best interests." "My company's image?" Alara's tone grew sharp for the first time, a whip crack in the quiet room. She took a step closer, and Corinne flinched back. "My company was founded on the idea that innovation comes from daring to be different, from seeing the world in a new way. It was built by people who were told they didn't fit in. If the image you seek to preserve is one of exclusion, arrogance, and the humiliation of others for sport, then this company needs more than a new image. It needs a cleansing." The candidates sat frozen in their chairs, their expensive resumes forgotten on their laps. Liam's face was slick with a cold sweat. Beatrice was staring at her pearl necklace as if she had never seen it before. The glass-walled room now felt like a cage of their own making, and the whole world was watching. Alara turned to the security guard, who had been standing by the door, his face a mask of professionalism, but his eyes now alight with a dawning understanding. "Thank you for your assistance," she said to him, her voice returning to its calm, respectful state. "But the ones who should be escorted out are not me." The guard nodded once, a crisp, decisive movement. His eyes, devoid of any sympathy, flicked to Sterling and Corinne. Sterling's survival instincts kicked in, overriding his shock with a surge of indignant fury. "You can't do this!" he shouted, slamming his hand on the table, the sound echoing his own professional death knell. "I have been on the board for 20 years. I built this division. I have rights." "You have been on the board of my company," Alara interrupted, her voice low and final, leaving no room for argument. "A company whose soul you have been slowly poisoning with this culture of fear and conformity. And I will not allow it to become a place that tramples on human dignity for the sake of appearances. Your tenure and your rights to this office are over, effective immediately." The guard stepped forward, a silent, immovable force. He gestured for Sterling and Corinne to follow. Corinne's eyes filled with fresh tears, her hands shaking as she gathered her purse and the clipboard she had dropped. She didn't look at anyone. Sterling continued to argue, his voice loud and desperate, his carefully maintained dignity shattering into a million pieces. "This is outrageous. You'll hear from my lawyers." But the guard didn't waver. He led them out, Corinne's quiet sobs the only sound in their wake. With the two architects of her humiliation gone, Alara turned her attention to the pale, trembling candidates. Liam, the man with the gelled hair, slowly, unsteadily, got to his feet. We're sorry," he said, his voice barely a whisper, a stark contrast to his earlier smug pronouncements. "For laughing at you, we were wrong." Alara regarded him for a long moment. There was a flicker of something other than steel in her eyes. It wasn't pity, but it wasn't unkind. "Don't apologize to me," she said, her words hanging heavy and true in the air, a lesson more valuable than any they could have learned in business school. "I am not the one you need to be concerned about. Ask yourselves how you will treat the next person you perceive to be weaker than you, the intern, the janitor, the barista who gets your order wrong. Your answer to that question will define your future, not this interview. No one responded. No one could. The weight of her words pressed down on them, forcing an uncomfortable, profound moment of self-reflection. She walked to the head of the table, to the chair where Sterling had sat, passing judgment just moments before. She took the seat, her movements slow and deliberate. Her canvas bag rested on the floor beside her, a humble anchor in a sea of opulence, a quiet symbol of her unchanged values. She looked at the stunned faces before her. The interviews, she announced, her voice resonating with a newfound authority that had been there all along, will begin now. And this time, I will be the one asking the questions. The story of what happened on the 48th floor of Vance Innovations spread like wildfire. It started as hushed, incredulous whispers in the hallways and on company Slack channels, then blossomed into a full-blown corporate legend. Within 24 hours, an anonymous, disgruntled junior executive in the IT department, who had long chafed under Sterling's rigid regime, leaked the security footage. The internet, with its insatiable appetite for drama and justice, devoured it. By the next morning, headlines blazed across news sites, tech blogs, and social media feeds. Phoenix CEO shocks board in undercover interview. The tattoo that toppled a corporate tyrant. Alara Vance, the reclusive genius, was thrust into the international spotlight. She became an overnight symbol, a modern-day folk hero for the underestimated. People shared clips of Sterling's red-faced fury, Corinne's tear-streaked departure, and the candidate's stunned, horrified silence. Her name and the phoenix on her arm became emblems of defiance, strength, and rebirth. Comments flooded in by the thousands, from people who had been judged for their accents, their clothes, their backgrounds, their age, their gender, or their appearance. "This is for all of us who were told we weren't the right fit," one wrote. "She showed them that worth isn't woven into the fabric of a suit," said another. Finally, a CEO who remembers what it's like on the other side of the table. And the consequences for the architects of their own downfall were quiet, steady, and inevitable, a slow tide of irrelevance pulling them out to sea. Sterling Prescott's career was over. A terse press release from Vance Innovations announced his resignation for personal reasons, but the industry knew the truth. No one wanted to be associated with his brand of toxic leadership. He tried to start his own consulting firm, leveraging his decades of experience, but the phone never rang. He was a relic, a cautionary tale. Corinne Fletcher's name started trending for all the wrong reasons. A tech blog, spurred on by anonymous tips from former colleagues, dug up old company emails where she had mocked other employees for their looks and belittled their ambitions. Her carefully curated LinkedIn profile went dark as her connections dropped her one by one, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. She moved out of state, her name becoming a whisper in HR circles, a synonym for the catastrophic failure of judgment. The candidates didn't fare much better. Liam, the man in the Navy suit, had his prestigious internship offer from a rival firm rescinded. "We saw the video," the HR manager told him curtly over the phone. "We don't tolerate that kind of behavior here." The woman with the pearl necklace, Beatrice, posted a long, rambling apology online, but it was seen as self-serving and insincere. A fashion brand, she was a minor ambassador for quietly terminated her sponsorship deal. Amidst this storm, Alara remained a figure of calm. She issued no statements. She gave no interviews. She simply went back to work. One evening, long after the offices had emptied, she stood by her window, watching the city lights flicker to life like a scattered handful of diamonds. The janitor, an older man named Matteo with kind eyes and graying hair, paused his cleaning to look at her. He had worked in the building for 15 years and had seen executives come and go. "Saw you on the news," he said, his voice gruff but warm, with a slight accent that spoke of a life lived far from boardrooms. "My daughter's got a tattoo, a dragon, on her back. Means the world to her. You did good, kid." Alara turned from the window, and for the first time that day, the mask of the CEO, the weight of being a symbol, softened. Her face was just her face. "Thank you, Matteo," she said, the words genuine. She knew his name. She knew he had 2 grandchildren. He smiled. A real, crinkly-eyed smile. De nada. He pushed his cart down the hall and began humming a quiet tune. The moment was small, a tiny, insignificant transaction in the grand scheme of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, but it lingered like a warm hand on a cold day. Later that night, alone in her quiet office, the memory of that day in the interview room mingled with another, much older memory. She found her fingers unconsciously tracing the outline of the phoenix through her sleeve. She remembered being 19, sitting in the sterile, beige waiting room of a hospital, the air thick with the smell of antiseptic and quiet grief. For a year, she had watched her mother, a vibrant, brilliant woman, fade away, consumed by an illness that stole her piece by piece. Her father, a man who dealt in assets and acquisitions, was lost, unable to negotiate with mortality. Ilara had felt a profound, shattering helplessness. After her mother was gone, the world felt gray and broken. She had stumbled through the days until, one afternoon, she walked into a small, clean tattoo parlor in a part of the city her parents would have shuddered at. She had sketched the design herself on a napkin, a phoenix, not just rising, but in the very act of becoming, its wings a maelstrom of fire and ash. It was a promise to herself, a promise to rise, to rebuild, to never let the world's cruelty break her spirit. It was her pain, transformed into something beautiful and permanent. Her father hadn't spoken to her for a month when he saw it. "You have disgraced yourself," he had said, his voice cold with disappointment. "You have marked yourself like a common criminal." But Ilara didn't care. She had already started building her company by then, coding in her dorm room, sketching ideas on those same napkins, turning her grief and her promise into something real, something that would last. The Phoenix wasn't a rebellion, it was a foundation. And as she stood in her office now, the CEO of the empire she had built, she knew that Sterling and Corinne hadn't just insulted her, they had insulted her promise. They had misread her foundation as a flaw. And that was a mistake they would never have the chance to make again. The change at Vance Innovations was not announced in a company-wide memo or a grand, sweeping speech. There were no new corporate posters with cheesy slogans about diversity. It happened quietly, organically, in small, significant moments that, when woven together, began to repair the very fabric of the company's culture. A week after the incident, a junior graphic designer named Maya, barely 22, approached Ilara in the company cafeteria. She was visibly nervous, her lunch tray shaking slightly as she stood by Ilara's simple table where she ate alone. "Miss Vance," she started, her voice low and hesitant. "I saw what happened, on the news. I just wanted to say, thank you." Maya paused, took a fortifying breath, and pushed forward. "I've got one too, a tattoo. I've worked here for a year, and I've worn long sleeves every single day, even in the summer, because I was so scared of what someone like Miss Fletcher might say." She pulled up the sleeve of her cardigan, revealing a small, intricate rose on the inside of her wrist, its petals shaded with an artist's care. Ilara looked at the delicate artwork, a symbol of beauty and strength. Then she looked back at Maya's hopeful, anxious face. She nodded slowly. "It's beautiful, Maya," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Wear it tomorrow." Maya's eyes widened. "Really?" "Really," Ilara confirmed. "This is a place for talent, not for hiding." A genuine smile, not the polished, corporate kind, but one of pure relief and joy, lit up Maya's entire face. The next day, she walked into the office in a short-sleeved blouse, the rose visible for all to see. A few older managers shot her curious looks, but nobody laughed. Nobody dared. The story had permeated the walls. The rules of the game had changed. Across the open-plan office, Ilara saw her and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement before returning to her work. The moment wasn't loud, but it sent a quiet shockwave of permission and acceptance through the company. In the boardroom days later, the remaining members of the board were noticeably more subdued, their usual blustering confidence replaced by a cautious respect. One senior executive, a man named Gerald, who had been a close ally of Sterling, cleared his throat. "Ilara," he began, testing the waters. "We're getting calls. Investors, partners, they're concerned. They want to know if you're fundamentally changing the company culture they invested in." Ilara leaned back in her chair, the same one Sterling used to occupy, and her fingers tapped lightly on the table. The tapping was not impatient, but thoughtful. "Good," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Let them ask. Let them be concerned. Tell them the culture they invested in had a rot at its core, and I performed the necessary surgery. We're building something real here, Gerald, not a museum for outdated egos and fragile sensibilities. Our value is in our innovation and our people, not in the uniformity of our dress code. If they have a problem with that, I will be happy to buy back their shares." The executive nodded, his face tight, and scribbled a note. The others exchanged glances. The message was clear. The old ways were over. There was a new and original authority in charge. One morning, as Alara walked through the lobby, a young intern, red-faced and flustered, fumbled a large stack of presentation boards, sending them scattering across the marble floor. He scrambled to pick them up, his face burning with embarrassment as he mumbled apologies to the executives who had to sidestep his mess. The old Vance Innovations would have seen people glare at him or walk over him without a second glance. But Alara stopped. She knelt down, her simple black slacks creasing, and began helping him gather the sheets. The lobby fell quiet as people watched their reclusive, legendary CEO on her hands and knees, picking up papers. "Breathe," she said, her voice low, as she handed him the last page. "It's just paper." The intern stared, his mouth open, utterly starstruck. Thank you, Miss Vance," he stammered. Alara simply stood, brushed her hands on her slacks, and walked away without another word. The intern watched her go, clutching the papers to his chest, a small smile breaking through his nerves. The other employees in the lobby, who witnessed it, exchanged quiet looks of respect and recalibration. She didn't need to gloat or deliver lectures. She was back at work, meeting with engineers about new clean energy patents, signing papers that would fund a new daycare for employees' children, shaking hands with a new cohort of interns she had personally welcomed. Her canvas bag was still there, sitting faithfully on the floor by her desk. Her white shirts were still plain, her hair still pulled back in a simple ponytail. But now, when she walked through the lobby, people noticed. Not because she demanded their attention with loud commands or expensive attire, but because they couldn't look away. Her quiet confidence had become a gravitational force. The phoenix on her arm stayed hidden most days, covered by the sleeve of her shirt. But everyone knew it was there. It was a silent reminder that the company was no longer built on the cold, hard surface of conformity, but on the strength, character, and resilience that lay beneath. It was a testament to the fact that sometimes, in order to build something new and better, the old structures and the old guards who protected them first had to be turned to ash. And from those ashes, something far more real and far more powerful had already begun to rise.